Today I'll be tying a Thunder Creek streamer. This is a fly pattern that is new to me. I had a customer contact me to see if I would tie this to imitate sockeye salmon fry. He's from Alaska, and the sockeye salmon go up and spawn, and then in the spring, it's maybe May or June, I don't know exactly the timing, but the fry return to the ocean, and this is an imitation that has done well for him. It's a multi-step fly, and mainly because I'm using UV resin for the head, as well as using some acrylic paint for the yellow eye. The black is UV resin as well. So let's start tying the fly. So the hook I'm using is new to me as well. So this is a Mustad. It's a 3261D. There's also a 3261, and it's a shorter shank hook. I'll begin by using some Danville white 70 denier thread. I start at the eye of the hook. Just take about 3 wraps to secure the thread. Maybe I need 4 wraps. That's comical because I've been tying dozens of these, and 3 usually works pretty well. Perhaps it's my camera setup that I'm kind of set off to the side somewhat. So as I start taking touching turns, or mostly touching turns, I'm just trying to create a base. And since this is a very long shank hook, it takes quite a few thread wraps. You can speed up the process, but I'm trying to go slow so I don't bend the hook too much. I find that it moves up and down quite a bit because of the extreme length of the shank. I'll continue to take touching turns, as I say, close to touching turns. When I look at my videos later, I notice that there are gaps in them. My camera lens is much better than my eyes, evidently. As I continue down, I will go to a spot that's about halfway between the hook point and the barb of the hook, right there. I'll use some Danville size 14 Mylar. This is gold on one side and silver on the other. And I want the silver showing for the body, so I tie it with a loose wrap. I tie it towards the shank of the hook with the gold outward. And I will take touching turns again all the way up. Or as I said earlier, close to touching turns. I don't think it's mandatory that they absolutely be there. It's just trying to create somewhat a base. And I will continue all the way up to the eye of the hook. Normally you could stop at a tie-in point, but in this particular case I'm trying to build up the head of the fly, and that will become obvious as I tie the fly. Now I'm behind the hook eye, and I will now go back, again using touching turns or close to it, to where the end of the head will be. And this is a critical part for the length of the head that you determine best fits your needs for a particular fly. And in order to gauge, I'm tying 12 dozen of these for a customer, and I want them to all be pretty consistent. So I will use a fly as a model to make sure I get it to about the right point. That looks good. I'll be using some brushable super glue. And I just put a very thin coat on the thread. And then I will make I'll pull the mylar forward and the silver will be showing then. So I wrap it forward. I try to use touching turns. And you might hear a little bit of squeaking. That's the mylar running through my fingers. I've got a lot of tension on it, just trying to keep it tight. And you notice I move the tinsel back and forth, the mylar, and it usually seats pretty well. If there's a slight gap, I don't think it'll make any difference, but I try to get it pretty well covered. And we're almost there. So I've come up to a point where my thread is. I'll hold my tinsel up, and with my opposite hand, I'll make a tight wrap, along with 2 more wraps to secure it, and then hold it upward and trim. I flatten my thread, and you'll see the tag end. And I'll cover that up as I continue to move forward. I want to end my thread right behind the eye of the hook. Now, you'll notice that the fly has bucktail, so I'm using some bucktail here. I'll take a picture and show you the bucktail. So what I've done is to take the top part off of a bucktail. So it fits right in here. And I snapped it off. And the reason is that in the bottom part of the bucktail, these fibers are a lot more hollow, and it will allow when I put tension with the thread, when I finish, I'll show this part in a moment, but it'll make the bucktail flare, and I don't want to do that. But if you move all the way up to the tip, as I mentioned, there's not as much hollow hair in here, so I'm taking the white off, and I've just put it in a hair stacker upside down. And as I mentioned, I'm tying a lot of these, so I want some consistency. And I'm choosing 8 fibers. There's 3. Those are kind of wild, so I don't want to use those. I want them to be fairly consistent in length instead of curly. What was that? 5? I gotta count them again. There might be a short one in there that I'll pull out. So that's 4. 5, 6, 7. And I'll get one more, hopefully fairly straight. It looks good. And then I just put these back so that I can use them for my next fly. Now you'll notice how much different this is in terms of length. And so what I want to do is to trim those so I can control them a little bit. So I'll just trim off the ends and now just stack them. Hold it sideways and I can grab them. And there was that short one I told you about. So you'll notice that there's one flaring, and sometimes you can just rotate a little bit and it might straighten them out. The other thing I've done is, I'll share a picture right now, that I've got a mark down here on my tying table that shows the dimensions I want for the wing. I'll turn this upside down, and I've already measured it. I'll take 3 soft wraps, and I want this to be on top of the hook, and it looks like it is, but I want it to go around a little bit of the side, so I just take my thumb and rotate it just a tiny bit, and that might move some of those fibers around, and it also makes sure that they're on top, or in this case the bottom of the hook. I'll continue to take touching turns, and I'll go down, hold up the butt ends and trim them, and that will be at an angle to create somewhat of a taper. You'll notice I'm flattening my thread again. I continue down to where the body ends, and then back up. And the reason I do this, I'm trying to build up, even though it's a small bit at a time, it does increase the size of the head. So there I am, right back at the eye of the hook, and I'll turn it right side up. And this time I will use some of the brown bucktail. So I've done a similar action here with the brown bucktail, and it's on top, and the fiber is a little bit shorter, so some of them may not be as long. In this particular case, I'm looking for around 18 to 20 fibers. That would be some consistency. I need to count for a moment, so I think that's 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. There's a little bit more than that, but those shorter fibers will pull out. At least that's my experience. 11, 12, 13. Here's about 16. And if you're tying these for you, you may not need to count. But this gets me somewhat consistent when I'm tying 12 dozen. As in the last one, these are different lengths, so I'm just going to trim them off so they'll be more easier for me to handle. As I try to stack them, I just use the hair sacker on the back of my hand, and I twist the hair sacker and pull it out slowly. And I'll grab up here somewhere, and there's a small one, and one more. This time I don't have to measure on the mark I've got below. I just want the brown to be a tiny bit longer than the white. And so I'm just visually making it a tiny bit longer. You notice a couple more pulled out. And I'll take a soft wrap. There's 3 of them, and do exactly the same thing. So I'll take my thumb and just move it back and forth, and that kind of evenly distributes it on top of the hook. And I'll continue to wrap back now with tighter turns. And again, I will cut at an angle. Flatten my thread and cover up all of those butt ends, mostly touching turns. I'll go back to the eye of the hook. The reason I'm doing this is to make sure I've covered up all of those ends as well as creating a little bit more bulk. And this is what's going to make the head. I'm trying to make my touching turns as I go down to the end of the head. That's where my thread will be. Flatten it. And now I need to separate these two. So I take my bodkin, and what I have found works well for me, rather than trying to pull these up, I put my bodkin right in the middle between the brown and the white and pull the brown down. I'm trying to do this so that you can see it too. It makes it more difficult. So usually there's a space right in there, and then I can pull those, just like that. And then I'll take my finger, put it on the bottom, and my thumb on top, and then just press. And that leaves those fibers on top. I'll take 3 wraps, loose wraps, and then take my thumb and forefinger again and just move those around to make sure they're on top and to try to distribute them a little bit on the side. And then take 2 or 3 more tight wraps. And that will be the belly of the fry. And you'll notice that there's a little bit of a loop in there for the material, and that's absolutely helpful when I finish the fly and create the head in the next step. So I'll do the same, pull these fibers back and press, grab them, and make some soft wraps to secure it, and do the same, just make sure they're on top, and that just aligns them a little bit better. And you notice how those fibers are not flared. So if I'm taking the bucktail from the bottom, these fibers in here, as I mentioned earlier, they're much more hollow, and if you were to pull down, then it would flare more like some deer hair. And when I worked with my customer, he was pretty adamant that he didn't want that hair to flare, and so I've tried to select the materials in such a way that it prevents them from flaring. So now I will whip finish. And we'll trim that. The next step is to use some Glow Bright. This is number 3. It's a fluorescent. I'll get my torch out here. You can see how it just lights up, and I like that. What I'm going to do is put just a tiny bit, a few wraps, right to cover the white. And this will look like right where the gills are for the fry. And I don't really know what it looks like. Perhaps it's some blood coming from the gills. I don't really know, but that's the way the original pattern that he wanted me to tie had on there. So there are ways. I did try just using white thread and using a marker of red, but I found that bled just a little bit. And what I needed to do was to look on the other side to make sure that there's not any white showing in there. So let's cover that up too. But I did use the marker, and I found that it bled a little bit because I've got all of this white. So this has worked better for me. Let me put my scissors down, and now I'll use some Solarez. This is some thin hard, and I like this because it's got an applicator here. What I plan to do is put a layer on this side, and then on the other side, on the bottom, and on the top. And that will build up this head. Let's see if I can get it here with the cameras. I usually put my finger on the vise and hold my hand, so I'm kind of managing that somehow. And this applicator, I just put a little bit on at a time. And it covers those the deer hair, the bucktail. That's one side. We'll turn it over and do the other side. The bottom. A little bit more on the bottom middle, and the top is for the last one. Making sure all that's covered, a little bit more on the top. Put my cap back, and then you can see there's a little bit of, it's not exactly smooth. So let me set this real quick. So I use about 6 seconds or so, and that, I don't want to get it too hot at one time. I let it cool just a tiny bit, and then we'll finish the set. So by putting the additional amount right in the middle, it creates what looks like to me a more realistic head of a fry. So that will set it. Since this is a multi-step process, what I do at this point is to take it off and attach it to this. I've got a dozen alligator clips, and I'll leave a link in the description where I bought those on Amazon. And I just keep it like this until I get a dozen of them. And then I purchased this paint marker. This is acrylic paint. And let me shake it up here. But I do it all at one time for a dozen of them. So rather than pulling this out for each of my flies, need to get a piece of paper here. So rather than doing it for each fly, I just do them all at the same time. So this will actually bend down, and that's what feeds some of the paint. So I just push, and it feeds paint into the tip. And that's what I'll use then. Let's see if I can do this. I start in the middle and just dab a little bit. And turn it over and do the other side. And that's what I use for the first step for the eye. I've attached them to those alligator clips, and I let those dry for a few hours just to make sure that they are solid. And then I will stop the video here and put another one in that's already dry, and I'll show you the next step for the eye. The next step is to put the black eye on, and for that I'm using some Solarez. This is some black. It has a brush, but I'm going to set that down And I have a toothpick here that I just touch the end of the brush. And then I'll just apply it. Again, I'm using my hand on the vise and using my thumb. And let's see here, so you can get a good view of it. There's one side, and then the other side. Set that down, put the cap back on, and we'll set that as well. Again, I use about 6 seconds on one side, and the other side that will begin to set it. And then I just probably wait about 20 seconds. And you might have heard me hitting my flashlight. I've used it quite a bit in the button that turns it on and off kind of sticks occasionally. And the other thing I'll note is that you can see the red within the UV light, so I really like that. I hear that UV products really intrigue the fish. They come over, so perhaps that works. I don't really know, but we'll assume it does. And then I will finish it off with another Solarez product. This is Bone Dry, and it has a brush as well. I'll just use a little bit. On the eye, on one side. I usually start to make sure I get those, and then I just rotate my vise and make sure I get a good coverage. I don't know if I got enough on it, so let's just put a little more here. And then we'll set that one final time. Just like the last ones, I wait about 6 seconds to begin to set that and let it cool for a second or two. And then we'll finish the fly just by rotating it. And that's the Thunder Creek streamer, tied very sparse. You can determine whether you want to put more fibers on there. As I mentioned, my customer he sent a picture of a fly, and I tried to count the fibers. If you've seen some of my videos before, I'm a counter, so whether it's thread wraps or materials, I seem to count. So that's the fly, and I should say that I'll have the fly pattern sheet attached, or a link to my Riverkeeper Fly website down in the description. And if you'd like to follow, I'd appreciate that, and leave a comment if you like. And I'll see you soon.